Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoyed the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Just before we get to this week's fascinating guest interview, this is episode 100, and I thought it was worth a special comment as a result of that. I can't believe we've made it to 100 episodes with this podcast. When I started out, I probably thought we were going to make half a dozen or 10 or whatever. I had no vision of how successful it was going to be. And actually, I'm really, really delighted that it's got to 100. It seems to be popular. It's now listened to in some 99 countries, which is more than half the world. So I am extraordinarily grateful if you've been listening to me regularly or even just occasionally, because that's terrific. And I very, very much appreciate it. I'm conscious that some of you are just casual listeners who probably pick up the odd episode. Some of you are more regular listeners who maybe get a decent amount of value from some of the stuff that I and my guests add in terms of thoughts for you and stuff that you can get from it. If you do get value from it, then think about please supporting the show, because that would make a really big difference to me. I say it on the back end of a lot of my episodes, but I wanted to put it on the front end just to give it a bit more of a highlight. But I have a Patreon site that you can access either by the support the show link in your podcast notes from your podcast platform, or by going directly to www.patreon.com/leading4life. And you'll find there the opportunity to either become a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show. And for very little money, it'll make a very, very big difference to what I do and the podcast's future. So if that's something you're prepared to do, I would be extraordinarily grateful. In the meantime, though, I'm very happy, as always, to have you listening. Thank you very much for that, and I really hope you enjoy the episode that follows. My guest this week is the author, historian, and broadcaster Paul Beaver. I've known Paul for many years, and his career is so multifaceted that it's pretty much impossible to do justice to it in a very short intro such as this. So I'm going to let him do that himself. When he speaks, he's going to take us through everything that he's achieved, which is an amazing amount of stuff. He's very much active in the defense arena, and so that's a topic obviously we cover in some depth as well. But his personal history is absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure you'll enjoy what he has to say as well. Lots of great stuff in here, so let's go to it. Paul, fabulous to have you on the podcast. I'm really, really looking forward to what I think will be an interesting conversation. So thanks very much for joining.
Bob, a great pleasure. I always enjoy talking to like-minded people and also people with their own experiences. And I'm sure we'll be sharing rather than anything else on here.
We absolutely will be doing that. That's for sure. But just to get us started, though, because I think when I was actually looking up some of the stuff you've done to think about the questions I might ask you, I realized the kind of very multifaceted nature of your career, which has been absolutely amazing and impossible for me to justify it and sort of explain it in a couple of sentences. So if you wouldn't mind just giving a bit of a summary of that journey so far, that'd be great.
Yeah, I've been really lucky. I've been able to reinvent myself a few times. I mean, I started off in life wanting to be a naval aviator. And the Royal Navy at the time, this is back in the 70s, were not recruiting aviators because they just had a bunch of former Royal Australian Navy Seahawk pilots when Melbourne was decommissioned had come in. They offered me submarines, and the whole idea of being a submariner was just not me. I mean, having my ghoulies irradiated, no girlfriend, no suntan, not being able to see the world, but, no, just not. And so I had to plow on with my degree. And I'd done a sort of what basically in overall terms you'd call mining engineering, only because I was interested in geology. I was interested in geography. I was interested in minerals and things. And I thought, well, this would be fun. So I actually worked in that for a bit and ran quite early in my career, i.e. year 2, I was running a £6 million estate in Zimbabwe, Ireland, and the United Kingdom, and basically looking out for land. I was a land agent more than a mining engineer. So that was really good. And then I started writing books, and that's when the big break happened. I wrote to Winkle Brown, Captain Eric Brown, amazing test pilot. I've written his biography, of course, and he's a man of many talents. And I wrote to him about the P1154, the supersonic version or replacement for the Harrier, as it was at the time. And it was cancelled, of course, in the 60s. And I wrote to him and said, can you just tell me why? Because I'm doing a book on aircraft carriers. And he said, too long to explain in a letter. Come to lunch. Sunday,
Wow,
12 o'clock. Be there. So I did, and it started a 40-year friendship with Eric, and I was there the day he passed away. It was that sort of friendship. But at the same table, he introduced me to a guy called Alexander Shepherd, who was a publisher. And Alexander said, "Do you know anything about helicopters?" And I said, "Not really. I can learn." He said, "Good. I'm starting a helicopter magazine. I'd like you to be the editor. Eric says you're the best person he knows." So I did a 3-day course in how to edit at a London University college and ploughed into it. And then from there was headhunted by Jane's to be naval editor, and then to run the Jane's yearbooks, and then to run Jane's Defence Weekly, and then to be their spokesman. And then as a result of that, got picked up by Sky News, and then the BBC, CNN, Fuji Television, you name them. I did pieces, war reporting for them. At the same time, I joined the Territorial Army. I joined the Army Air Corps, and I was quite unique in that I was given flying instruction. I was given a flying course, basically mirroring that senior officers are given when they're appointed to the Army Air Corps who are not aviators. So I got to fly as well. I'm the only one, and I just wonder if I was just perfection or perhaps it was too much effort. Anyway, I had a good time doing that. So as a war reporter, I could combine journalism and my knowledge from Jane's and the fact that I knew how to survive in Bosnia or Kosovo or any of the other horrible places. Well, actually not lovely places I went to in horrible circumstances. So that was quite good. And then Parliament picked me up as a specialist advisor to the Defence Select Committee, which I did for nearly 15 years, which was really good. And particularly under James Arbuthnot when he was the chairman, because we did 77 reports, never a minority report, always everybody agreed. James is brilliant at bringing people together. And we looked at a lot of things, and I was able to bring my detailed knowledge and I suppose really my contacts as well. So that was jolly good. And my army career, I had leadership roles in various places. I worked for David Richards as Chief of the General Staff. I worked in defense intelligence. I worked in the Soviet helicopter area. I got to go to Zhukovsky Flight Test Center in Moscow really early, 1992.
Wow, nice.
And sort of rudimentary Russian was enough rudimentary Russian and 200 Marlboro cigarettes in packs was enough to get me to be able to measure the MiG-31 and find that Jane's All the World's aircraft, which had taken the dimensions from photographs, was only 10 centimeters out with the length and I think less than a meter with the wingspan, and certainly more accurate than DI had been in their predictions. And then back into writing books again, really, and doing a bit of consultancy and just Bob. It sounds like a long ramble, but actually, I've had a really good life. I mean,
yeah, that's amazing.
I've just done things that I wanted to do, and I've been able to, I hope, give back with charities like SAFA and all the other things that I do charity-wise. I try to give 10% of my earnings to various charities, which range from mine to deaf children to things that just appeal to me. So, yeah, charmed, lucky, and including having a family. I mean, all all is good. And I have no medication. When I do my CAA Class 2 medical every year, the CAA says, you're over 70. Why aren't you taking medication? Well, I don't need to take medication. We want a second opinion. So we have the second opinion, and they find that, no, I don't need medication. And despite my predilection for champagne, my liver is still functioning, touch wood.
Well, as I said at the beginning, very multifaceted and very elaborate as a career. I mean, it's extraordinary, really. How many books now?
Well, Mitchell, coming out in September, Father of the Spitfire, will be number 80. But that includes all of the Jane's studies I did on things like with Richard Wolff on Soviet High Command. We named every colonel and above in the Soviet armed forces in a time before computers. So it became a really useful Bible because both of us could read. The Soviets were really interesting. Each service had its own magazine and newspaper, and it named everybody, and it told you what they were doing because it needed to disseminate to the world's largest organization, the Red Army, this information. And we just gleaned it, and we just went through and created. Richard had actually started it with card indexes, and he was in the intelligence corps, and it was great. We had a lot of fun doing that, and Jane's Strategic Systems worked on that with various editors. I suppose probably the best time was Jane's Fighting Ships, working with Richard Sharp, who had been Commodore of the Admiralty Interview Board that had just about passed me. I apparently was cocky because when they showed me a picture of a destroyer, I was supposed to say it's a destroyer, and I went, a D-42, that's HMS Southampton, built at Woolston, deck letter Sierra Delta, current captain is, and they went, no, we don't want to know that bollocks. Just want to know it's a destroyer.
Too much information. Brilliant.
So, there we go.
Yeah, I love it. I think that talk about prolific, 80 books or publications, that's extraordinary. There's a few bits to pick up on in there. I think going right back to your Submariner thing at the beginning, I have to say, having been fortunate enough to be on submarines a couple of times in my Air Force career when I was in joint jobs, I would share your view. I think I have huge admiration for those that do it. I think it's an incredibly demanding and challenging role, but it would not be one that I could ever do. I would just find it too confining and baffling, really.
What they tried to sell me on was that submarines were like aeroplanes, they're three-dimensional. And I was lucky enough to get a ride in Turbulent. I was the first non-naval person or non-constructor on Vanguard when she was first commissioned, and took the TV cameras of Sky on board. And that was an enormous fun doing that. But I worked up great admiration, as you say, for the leadership on board the boats, because it is really good. And every submariner captain I've met has been an outstanding individual and a hugely good leader of men. I mean, Captain Lightoller, I think grandson of the Lightoller of the Titanic, was the captain of Turbulent. And the way he ran the ship, particularly the control room, where I spent a lot of my time when we were submerged, amazing feeling of power, that big nuclear capability behind you, and all the sensors. I mean, we were being hunted by Sea Kings with dipping sonar, and you could hear the splash of the sonar going into the water, and knowing they couldn't, they were wobbly-wop miles away, and knowing they couldn't detect us because all we did was go down through a layer, salt water or warm water or fresh water or very salty or whatever it was. And the guys just knew all about it. I mean, it's just quite remarkable.
Yeah, I agree. I was one of my experiences was when I was in the operations directorate as assistant chief defence staff ops. I said to my military assistant at the time, who was a submariner, and I said, hey, I've never been on a submarine other than alongside. I'd quite like to go and have a look. And I was expecting to go out on a Thursday war or something from Devonport and go and do just a little, soiree somewhere. And the next thing is I found he'd arranged for me to go with the first Sea Lord, Mark Stanhope, at the time. And we went over to Ortec when the HMS Astute was doing trials work against USS New Mexico. And so we did. I mean, I just stayed on a stew. The first Sea Lord went on both boats, but it was absolutely fascinating, as you say. And we were doing your three-dimensional thing. We were doing what I would describe as air combat, but underwater in a submarine, with the difference of, whereas I was used to it with 1,000 knots closing speed, we probably got a 3-knot closing speed or something. And they were trying to explain for some period of time the sonar to me. And I have to say, I came out at the end of the trip none the wiser. It was just amazing. And exactly as you say, the sort of sensory array and the capability of the machine and the dedication of the crew and the sort of focus of their task was really, really impressive.
Do you know, Bob, you can see why NATO and friendlies send their captains, potential submarine captains, to do Perisher with us, because the Perisher course is the most demanding naval course, and people fail. I mean, but if you get through it, you know how good you are. I think Mark Stanhope was both a student, and I think he may have been teacher.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he absolutely was. Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
so he was.
He really knew what was going on. But I remember Mark Stanhope, I thought was a great first Sea Lord. I negotiated with him. Now you're gonna smile at this one. A colleague and I decided we needed a heliport in East London, and HMS Illustrious would be perfect when she was decommissioned as a heliport. She had everything there. So I negotiated with Mark and then with Mindy P and then eventually with Abbey Wood. And you can imagine which was the easiest. And we bought HMS Illustrious. For a very short period, I was the owner of the, seventh most powerful ship in the world, or whatever it was. I mean, we had an aircraft carrier. And eventually Boris, when he was mayor of London, decided that he didn't like helicopters and it was bad for boats or whatever. And so we had to sell it back to the MOD for the same amount of money. But we did have a lot of fun.
That's a great story. Yeah, I love it.
And poor old Mark Stanhope was really quite disappointed because he rather fancied that. Because we had a very good plan. It would be in the borough of Newham, and it would become a maritime school. And we'd keep the engines there, decouple them, obviously. I keep the engines so that people could do apprenticeships on gas turbine engines or whatever, and keep the aircraft lifts and everything. There'd be the hangar deck would become an MRO, a maintenance place for helicopters. Really good. Well, I hadn't realised, and I really should have done, as the political power that the Barclay brothers had, who were then the owners of Battersea Heliport. And of course, they didn't want anyone to...
no rival heliports,
their
please.
monopoly. So I learned a lot from that one too. You know what? You never stop learning.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's true. I mean, just picking up on some of the other stuff you said in your intro there, I think that the Defence Intelligence versus Jane's Defence Weekly, I can always remember when I was serving, we often used to say that the combination of Jane's Defence Weekly and or Jane's generally and Aviation Week, that would provide you with something that when you put it together and read it and you kind of go, yeah, okay, the difference between that and something that's sort of top secret strapped to at the highest level of classification was pretty limited. There was a really good job done there in terms of gleaning the information on, particularly on kit.
I mean, at the time, this was the Cold War. We were trading information, and I got to do things that I can remember meeting a whiskey class captain in the Middle East somewhere and having a long conversation about the whiskey and discovering that it actually had 3 propellers. And we thought it only had 2. And DI thought it only had 2. So he presented me with a model of his submarine, which I proudly took into then old war office building in the basement. Took it in, so there you go. And everyone was going, could be disinformation. On the other hand, may not be. And, some submariners were contacted and can you hear 3 props for the whiskey? And they all went, yeah, well, why didn't we know that?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're right. I mean, and Aviation Week, Aviation Leak, as it used to be called, was, if you wanted to know what the Americans were doing, the Americans would put stuff in. And do you remember there was a US Secretary of State, Caspar Weinberger, who produced Soviet military power? Well, he produced that as a way of getting more money from Congress for defense. But it was done with James. It was done with a small team of us who, because of our contacts, we were able to get him information that he then had artists draw up. And then we were able to use the artist's impression of SS-19 or whatever it happened to be. And it was a really good relationship. But, James has changed. The whole world has changed. The James Fighting Ships is now, a £5,000 book or whatever. Well, my first James Fighting Ships was £5 when I was at school. So I've still got it.
Yeah, I'm always amused. I get every year of having made it to the 2-star level. I'm in Who's Who, of course, and I get my biography review, and they very kindly offer me the opportunity to buy a copy of Who's Who, a reduced price, which is still absolutely extortionate.
Yes,
so I kindly decline on that.
But all of that, has changed. I mean, if you look at, so I'm obviously very closely following what's happening between Israel and Iran, having done a lot of work on ballistic missiles and knowing where Iran's links are with Pakistan, China, and North Korea, and looking at all of that. If you look today at things like Twitter, I mean, you get almost instantaneous views of ballistic missiles in the air. That, well, first of all, we didn't have the cameras in the 80s to take those pictures, if anyone had ever done that. But it's just unbelievable. I'm really glad, actually, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not, a proper defense analyst. I'm a sort of, I suppose I'm a writer. So, I write aviation books and histories, and I write books on cocktails. I've got 6 books on cocktails, the 7th one under preparation. I drink champagne. I'm an ambassador for a champagne house.
That's a role I'd like. That is definitely
that's a hell of a job. I had to pay fortune to get that. But I enjoy that, and it works on all my prejudices. You walk into and I'm still lucky to be invited to receptions in London. You walk into an embassy other than the Italian embassy, but where they serve excellent prosecco. You walk into and somewhere else, and the sparkling. You look at the colour, and you take one sniff, and you get prosecco, and often it's onto the water or the elderflower. So I get very self-opinionated about wine and food, champagne especially, and cocktails. This shaken but not stirred rubbish. What do you want to do? Break up the vermouth go on forever.
You can't say that. James Bond would be most upset.
So I know the Fleming family card. I mean, James Bond is one of my things on my business card. It says that one of my specialist subjects is James Bond. So I love the books. I know a lot of people in the Fleming family as well, and so I've got little snippets of that. I discovered that the Vespa was first drunk way back in 1941. So on the 17th of May, 2021. A group of us went to Duke's, because where else do you go in London for a cocktail? And we had a Vespa, and it was a very powerful Vespa. And it took me a while to walk the half an hour back to my flat in Marylebone from Duke's.
Oh, that's a good cocktail if it's a one-shot wonder.
Yeah, but it took me about 2.5 hours to find my flat.
Oh, my goodness.
It was good. I was very happy. But I have no idea where I went. Probably this as well.
That's great. When there's so many stories we could pick up on here. I do want to come back to the geopolitics stuff, but I think the other thing I'm just picking up from what you said right at the beginning is the Winkle Brand thing. I mean, what a privilege to know him, obviously, as you did very well, and extraordinary man, extraordinary stories. I mean, I was lucky enough to do a podcast with Colin Bell 7 or 8 months ago now. And again, incredible generation, incredible people. But tell me a little bit more about Winkle Brand, because I think that must have been great to get to know him properly.
Yeah, I really did get to know him properly. I mean, I probably, in the last 5 or 6 years of his life, was seeing him every few weeks and busily gleaning as much as I could from him. I was lucky enough when he passed away, he left me all his papers. As a whole room, my house in Hampshire, of Winkle Brown papers.
Wow. Because I think I'm right in saying he's got more types and more carrier landings than anybody, right? Extraordinary.
487 types. And that doesn't include the 14 models of Spitfire that he flew, or the 8 models of Seafire. So he just counted Spitfire as one.
Wow. 487 types.
Yeah. And the Americans have tried to better that, but can't. There's actually a Brit at the moment trying to do it, but of course he's doing it with microlights and whatever that Eric would probably turn his nose up at. 2,407 arrested landings, not all on carrier decks, some adults who aerodrome deck landing system. Catapult launches 2,271, including being hoisted up onto the catapult at Farnborough when he was a test pilot there, and being launched in an Oster, because they thought, if we're going to have aero-P spotting for the guns at D-Day, to fly an Oster across the channel is a pretty dodgy thing to do. So let's mount them on catapults on landing craft and catapult them into the air to go there. I mean, the 101 uses of a landing craft. So he did that. But what's interesting looking at his logbook was many of his flights were 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, because he was testing. He'd go up, say, yeah, the modification you've done to that still works, or whatever it was. But we had a dinner for what we thought was his 90th birthday, and that's the story in itself, in 2009. And somebody said, Paul ought to write your biography. And he went, well, he can, after I've passed. I don't want him to do any research until I've passed. I'll leave him all my papers. And of course, we found out why. Because when he was younger, he had been selected to play rugby for Scotland. And that meant that he had to be born in Scotland. So he doctored his birth certificate. He was actually born in Hackney. He's Cockney. And he doctored the age as well. So instead of being born in 1920, which he actually was on his passports and his naval records, he had put on this birth certificate, 1919, which then he had to maintain the cover after that, When talking to the chief registrar in Scotland about this, she said, well, we all know him up here. He was given the award of Great Scot of the 20th century, And she said, bit of a blow to know he's a Cockney. And I said, yeah, but if you ever met him, I said, he was a Scot through and through. I mean, he went to school in Scotland. I mean, he was at the Royal High School. He went to the University of Edinburgh. He was always a Scot. Interestingly, though, when he left the Navy in 1970 and could live anywhere, he went to live in Surrey and then got a job down there and actually did a really good second career, North Sea helicopter safety. The flights are safe because of Eric Brown, because of all the work he did using his test pilot skills to create basic flight profiles on how to approach a rig and how to deal with engine emergencies. So you approach the rig and you land on, but then when you leave the rig, you don't just transition out and off you go. You come back up. So if you have an engine failure at that critical time, you just go back down onto the paddock. This is all from Eric's mind. So, but fascinating. You need to read, if you haven't read the book, well, first of all, I'm flabbergasted, but secondly, it shines a light onto a man who's a complex character, who was not a leader of men. When he had squadron command, he was absolutely rubbish. He was really good by himself. I mean, as a test pilot, and he was a test pilot until 1949. And he was selected to be a test pilot because he managed to land his Martlet Wildcat on a pitching deck, having been shot in the face by a Condor. And everyone thought, well, he'll probably crash into the barrier. And he took the second wire, saved the aircraft, saved the day. And the captain of the carrier, HMS Audacity, wrote a signal to the Admiralty and said, post this man away from operational flying because he'll die. People are dying in the North Atlantic in the Fleet Air Arm. I mean, the casualty rate is as high as Bomber Command. I mean, Fleet Air Arm pilots who trained before the war, most of them were dead by 1943. and flying accidents in the sea. I mean, you have this isn't just enemy action. So Eric got into test flying, and he was really good by himself, making his own decisions. And he often told his flight test engineer, "Just be quiet. I need to concentrate on the flying." But he did things like he rolled a Lancaster, so which I think is pretty cool.
Old.
Kept 1G all the way around, and to prove it, he had 4 boffins standing, all holding glasses of water, which didn't spill. That is pilot skills.
That's
so he
seriously skillful.
Pilot skills, but he didn't have leadership skills. So he had no idea how to coalesce a naval air squadron together. And he was too much of a martinet to do that. He didn't understand the way you just get, you've been there. You've been in this position, Bob. You bring your squadron with you. You lead from the front, but they follow you. You don't tell them what to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think for those who are listening to this who don't actually know much about Eric Winkle-Brown, I think definitely he's a character worth exploring. He's an extraordinary man with an extraordinary ability. And what you say about leadership is fascinating in there too. And it takes us into that sort of leadership piece, really, because it is the Air Force, I think, a long time ago recognized this when they went for the specialist aircrew model as well, where you can have people who are very good at flying aeroplanes, but actually are not necessarily going up the career ladder. And you want both. You do need both in a lot of organizations. And I think it's true for some of the work I do these days on leadership, where people naturally assume that if you're going up the career ladder, you must be a good leader. And that's often not the case, I think, sadly. And equally, some of the time you're going to be a good leader anyway, without any investment, without any training, without any development. Well, I mean, that's really hard to do. Occasionally people will bubble up through the system and be good at that. But it is recognizing in yourself, having enough self-awareness to realize what you're good at and what you're not so good at, how you're going to surround yourself with people that do the right kind of things, how you're going to, as you say, inspire people to follow you, rather than just order them about in a very authoritarian kind of way is really interesting.
I've been fortunate. I am fortunate enough to be in my 3rd tour as an honorary group captain on 601 Squadron. And in the Territorial Army, I reached full colonel. But I really enjoy that. And I enjoy the occasional invitation to go to the Tedder Academy, part of the Cranwell setup, which I really love doing, because you find incredibly intelligent people who are junior NCOs who are invited onto that. I can remember one young lady who was an intelligence analyst, Witten or somewhere, and she had 2 master's degrees, one in Russian and one in aerospace engineering. So guess what she was doing? And I said, "Have they not promoted you?" She said, "No, I don't want to be promoted. I have the best job in the world. I get to see top secret stuff about aeroplanes in Russian. I mean, what more could I want to do?"
Yeah, they promote me. They take me away from all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the way but she was being inspired, and eventually she would need to do something. It's only so much of the pay band you can do. And I'm sure she may even by now be commissioned, because she was definitely officer material. And I could see her doing a specialist role, but she had great I watched her with the other junior NCOs, and she was leading them in so much of what they were doing.
Yeah, because the expertise brings its own kind of leadership qualities, doesn't it? If you have a lot of professional expertise. But I mean, as you say, I was always very impressed when I was commanding a squadron, and most of my Air Force roles, actually, you'd very regularly see that. You'd have people who academically were incredibly highly qualified. And one of the interesting conversations I often have, particularly talking to civilian audiences, about military leadership, because there is this perception, completely wrong perception, that it is about ordering people about and then, jump how high kind of thing. And of course, it's definitely not that. And it's certainly not that in the technical parts of the services. So if you're in the Air Force, the Navy, or the technical bits of the Army, then they are bright people who will challenge and will turn around and need to be understanding why you're asking, telling them to do something. And unless you can get that across in a way that actually works and resonates with them, then they might follow you once or twice out of curiosity, but that's going to be it. And you really do need to have that kind of approach that is bringing them with you in a way that is explaining and justifying and taking them on that journey that is critical. And it's such an important feature of leadership as a whole. Looping back to your various bits of experience, I mean, your time in the Army, your time in the Air Force, the stuff you've seen just in all of your various roles. I mean, I'm really interested in your perspectives on leadership in general, and not only your own. I mean, how you've kind of adapted your style over the years and so on, but what you see in other people, what you think, what are the traits that are most valuable, what are the traits that are least apparent, all those kind of things, just your perspective.
So I think I've seen three types of styles of leadership. I was fortunate to work with Special Forces, particularly with 2123 SAS, and the culture there of the best person leading, so no rank insignia at first name terms, getting the job done whilst doing something, whilst even training. Very, 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 very important. It's a mindset thing there, I think. A lot of the Army worried me, particularly when I came up against county infantry regiments that were very, very hierarchical. The Air Force less so. I mean, I've been lucky enough, as I say, to have done things in 601, which, as a group captain, you go to an air station, you're sitting on the right-hand side of God because, the station commander is God. And you're a group captain, and you can watch from that position of power how things happen. I've done a little bit of work on the Battle of Britain leadership styles, people like Sailor Milan, for example, as opposed to Barda. Really interesting different styles. But there was one guy called David Darley, who commanded 609, which is Auxiliary Squadron, County of West Yorkshire, based at Middle Wallop. So obviously I know Middle Wallop well because this is now the Army Aviation Centre. He would often have his most experienced flight sergeant lead formations. So when they had a squadron scramble, he would be at the back because he said what he liked to do was shepherd. And he had a younger, usually an auxiliary, who everybody knew in the squadron because he'd been parachuted into command as a regular. And everyone coalesced with the flight sergeant. And they all knew him because up until the end of the Battle of Britain, 609 was basically 609 who had been in 1938. So the officers were the landowners, the senior NCOs were the estate's managers, and the ground crew were all the people who worked on the farm. And because we're very rural in that time. And it's just fascinating to then read what happens. So the squadron was the second highest scoring squadron. I mean, it has the record for the largest number of enemy aircraft downed in one combat. And you look at all of that, and that's all through the leadership. Okay, a little bit is putting the fighter controllers, putting it into the right position at the right time and all of those things. But they survived with no casualties at that engagement because they were really well led and really had been trained in a way that allowed the senior NCOs to make their points. He wasn't the font of all knowledge. And that, I think, is something that the Royal Air Force has still got. I like what I see with that. I'm a huge fan of the current chief, soon to be chief of the Defence Staff, Rich Knighton. He's not a pilot, he's an engineer, but he knows he's an engineer and he knows what he can do. And he's got brilliant people around him who are pilots or navigators. I mean, that's what you do. I mean, you play to your strengths, but you understand that you have your weaknesses. And the Army has sort of got that, but not in the same way. I think probably the Army Air Corps was quite lucky because it was a small 1,700 people, all ranks. It's a very small organization. Everybody knows everyone. And that, I think, is quite important as well. Because the Air Force is much larger. And then, of course, the time I was first in the Territorial Army, it was 100 and whatever thousand. I mean, we all thought we were going to die in the West German plain, and still didn't stop us. We were going to do our bit because, hey, our fathers had done the same before. There was a lot, though, of wearing a beret exactly in the right position, and then And then you got Maverick. So I had my first squadron commander was a complete Maverick. He sent me my first day, walked into the ops room, and I was wearing exactly the same flying suit and rank insignia as another second lieutenant. So I was the junior. He sent me home to change in some way. So I came back wearing desert rank insignia, which made me slightly different because he did not like uniform. He liked everyone to have, woolly pulleys and whatever, which just, I don't know, did it improve? What did it improve? Our morale? And we all looked up to him from that. And he used to admit he couldn't navigate. So I used to be his navigator for a while. I'd sit in the left-hand seat of the scout. And we'd go off and we'd do really quite complex navigation exercises, really low. The most extreme was using contour-only maps. And, a lot of fun doing that, but great leadership. I mean, he knew how to galvanize us all together.
Yeah, some great points in there. I totally agree with you about Rich Knighton, by the way. I think for so long during my own time in the Air Force, there was this great debate about how only a pilot could lead the Air Force. And I'm kind of going, well, I'm not sure that's true. And of course, you look at a lot of other big organizations that they don't necessarily have some deep specialist for the topic of whatever they're doing leading it. But if you're going to have somebody who steps in the first one to be a non-pilot to do that, Rich was the right guy to do it. I mean, I know him really well. He's done a great job, and it's lovely that, as you say, I think he's about to be the next chief of defence, which is fantastic.
But it is interesting, isn't it? Because the Navy's gone for Royal Marine for the first time, and Queen Jenkins is a real character, and I think that's fascinating. Secret Intelligence Service has appointed its first woman. These are all significant things. That this is a grown-up system now.
Yeah, we are finally moving into best person for the job, I think. Yeah. I mean, for too long, there's been a bit of lip service paid to that in a lot of government institutions where it's been, oh, no, it's best person for the job. Yeah, but it's okay, but it's so-and-so's turn. You go, well, hang on.
And we still have that in the civil service. I mean, I was horrified, going back to when I bought an aircraft carrier. The commercial side, none of them were commercially qualified. They'd all just been promoted, and 3 of them were working part-time and 2 were working from home. And so in a business environment, which is where my colleague came from, he couldn't understand why they went home at 4:00. We hadn't finished, I think we could do with now a major overhaul of our civil service and promote merit and reward merit with people.
Yeah, it's interesting on the qualifications thing, because one of my comments I make quite a lot when I'm doing training with people on leadership stuff is I think I'm certainly not going to advocate that military leadership is the be-all and end-all here. I think there are a lot of very good leaders in defence and have been over history as well, but there are also some terrible ones. I think the training system is good, though. I think the thing that works really well certainly in the UK military, and it's true for a lot of others, is that the first thing you get taught to do is lead people. And that's a building block upon which you then build your specialist skills. I mean, in my case, learn to fly airplanes, that sort of thing. Whereas I think pretty much every commercial organisation I've come across, and in fact, every commercial organisation I've come across, I haven't found one yet that is not this way. They'll hire people based on their qualifications and their experience, and they'll promote them based on the delivery of whatever the business requirement of them is. If they're salespeople and they sell well, they're going to get promoted. And actually, there's relatively little opportunity or actuality for proper leadership training interventions along the way. I mean, some get it, and that's great. Some are just naturally quite good, and that's great. But there are an awful lot of people who just find it really hard because they're not actually upskilled in a way that is appropriate. And I think that is sad. And that's true in an awfully wide spectrum of organizations where they just kind of expect that their people will, by osmosis, suddenly be better leaders. And funny old thing, I don't think that works.
No, I don't think it does. And I think you're right. The military do not have a monopoly on good leadership. I quite like the hierarchical piece of the military. Whenever I've interacted, for example, when I was at Sky News, trying to work out who actually had the power took a while because there was nothing there. And that took me a while to get to understand just how you did that. But in leadership terms, my time in HCDC, the House of Commons Defence Committee, I mean, watching James Arbuthnot So a banker by background, politician, what I would call a one nation Tory, a very balanced centre person. His leadership style was very much, bringing people along and getting opinions and listening to everybody and then making a decision and sticking to it. So when we were doing I'm trying to think of a report that we did some really quite controversial reports, but we got everyone together and we all agreed, and then we all sat together and we knew what the mission command, in a way, we knew what the mission was, we knew the commander's intent, and we followed it. And then that meant it was a sort of cabinet-like gathering where each member of the committee, irrespective of their political party, would say, no, this is our report, these are our recommendations. And I know that some particularly from the Scots Nats, for example, they found it they had a lot of pressure from political pressure, and good for them. They said, no, this is committee's decision. So that's leadership there as well, I think, which is important. But anyone who tries, in my experience, 40 years of trying, more than 40 years, I was going to say 50 years, bloody hell, it's frightening.
The years tick by.
God, don't they? But if I look at things that I've done and people I've worked with, and having never really worked for anybody properly, I mean, never been on a career ladder, not ever wishing to do more than what I enjoyed. I mean, I was deeply surprised to get to full colonel in the Territorial Army, I'd say, but that was. But that worked really well because I had some particular skills that seemed to work there. But if you look at this, it's all about the people. So how do you teach people? And it's social skills and it's empathy. It's EQ as well as IQ.
Big time. Yeah, and I think it's an increasing problem, actually, that when with the work I do quite a lot of work still with Deloitte University, and I tend to work with a sort of senior manager director level there. So I guess in age, roughly speaking, late 20s to mid 40s, that sort of thing. I mean, there's some outliers in there, but that's the broad strokes. And there's no doubt for a lot of them in the workplace now, and I only use Deloitte as an example. I think it's true everywhere. There are some quite significant challenges with the younger generation, and I'm not being disparaging about them per se, but I just think that they have found it harder. I think COVID's been a factor. I think post-COVID is a factor because people are still working remotely all the time. These sorts of things, exactly as you say, some of the social skills, the ability to network, the ability to make small talk with people, to be able to build a relationship over time and recognize that it's not an entirely transactional world. All those kind of things are absolute skills that are important in almost any walk of life, to be honest. And I think are a bit more challenging now than they perhaps used to be, because then there's less structure around actually doing them.
I think people don't have to. They don't have to go out and make a network. They can go on the phone and make a network on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is. It's been amazing for opening up the world to so many people with so many opportunities. It also has to be understood that social media has its issues. Hate speech, all of this stuff that's there, and it ungoverned space. Whereas most of the time, conversations are not ungoverned. There are rules. I mean, I really enjoy working in the diplomatic community here in London because everybody is really social. Everybody loves a conversation. And each defense attaché, for example, is also an ambassador for his country and for his armed forces. So that works really well. There's lots of communication. There's lots of chats, of breakfasts, of drinks, of whatever, which all work really well. But you don't find that in a lot of places where people go home at 5. And I think that's quite sad. I wonder, I see posters for loneliness in the new generation, the younger generation, a real problem, mental health. Well, never happened in my day that we knew of.
Yeah, I think that's an important caveat, isn't it, that we knew of. I think that some of that stuff is really good that's now playing out much more strongly. Yeah. I think that at the same time, some of the time it can be overplayed. People will use it as an excuse for whatever their shortcomings are rather than actually anything else. And I mean, interestingly, the hierarchy point you made a few minutes ago, the military is self-declared a hierarchy. I mean, obviously, there is a clear rank structure, and that's how it exists. Although, interestingly, I mean, in the Air Force, in the flying environment, in the Air Force, very regularly you took your rank off. Essentially, you know, not literally, but you'd be sat in a debrief, having either led or been part of a formation where you were the senior player in it in terms of rank. But absolutely, that didn't play any part whatsoever in the debrief at all. And we very much created a system where people felt empowered, felt trusted, and knew that whoever they were talking to would take it on the chin if there was some point to be made to somebody who was really quite senior that actually they hadn't delivered in whatever particular way, or and so on. And I think that's a really good thing. I think there are quite a lot of commercial organizations that profess to be very flat structures, but actually they're not at all. And they still have a very clear hierarchy, and it's almost more insidious than if you're not careful. You don't think there's a hierarchy, but that absolutely really is, and then you get caught out by it, and that's unfortunate. So transparency and clarity around that, I think, is particularly important.
I think things move on, don't they? From the night, the just-in-time culture, I think, has been shown to be lacking in so many places.
Just too late, yeah.
That's just too late. I mean, and personal responsibility. Something that my time in the Territorial Army taught me was very much to take responsibility for my own actions. There was nobody there to make my bed. It was up to me to turn up wearing the correct uniform. Now, the self-discipline bit seems to have gone a bit now. I sigh heavily when somebody says that they're in their office, nobody goes in on a Monday because they need the time off to recover from the weekend and their mental health. Yeah, okay. It just doesn't work with me. Maybe, Bob, I'm getting too old.
Yeah, I was going to say, we sound like a couple of dinosaurs on this, don't we, now? That's the trouble.
Like a couple of angry old men. Well, not angry old men, but, we do a bit, don't we? But there are good things that come out of it. I'm quite impressed with the way in which my son has embraced recent graduate last year, has first job applied for, got, and he's in a syndicated Lloyd's of London as an underwriter. He has a network already. He understands how the system works, and he's there as long as the job takes. Now, a bit of that may be parental in there, but I think it's very much he really enjoys what he does, and he has a really good series of bosses who is exactly so. If there is nothing on a Friday that requires you to be in the office, well, work from home. There is that capability to do. If there is, however, a meeting with a broker that's required on a Friday, Saturday, or a Sunday, doesn't matter. You have to do that, and that's the rewards are good, but so the responsibilities, and I think that's important as well. And that shows his bosses have got good leadership skills.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think the other thing that's important in the kind of conversations that we've been having really is to recognize that I'm pretty sure that when I was 20-something, the leadership of the day would be looking at my kind of group of comrades and be basically saying, these losers, they don't do this, they don't do that, they're totally different to us. So I don't think anything much has changed. I think the reality is, the previous generation will always look at you slightly askance. I think one of the good things about the young generation today is they're values driven. They're very, very challenging on people's values, and they're forcing individuals and organizations to wake up and take notice of some stuff that they perhaps have ignored too much in the past. And particularly in the culture of the organization and around things like climate and what they're actually doing, and whether they're actually walking the walk as well as talking the talk in some of this space. So I think there's some really, really positive things that are coming from that are forcing leaders to actually sit up and take notice in a way that they maybe haven't done for quite some time. And that's a good thing. I think there's also, on the other side of that coin, there's a recognition, and again, I say this quite a lot to people, that in a world where people feel, rightly or wrongly, that they can dress how they want, talk how they want, be in work whenever they want, not actually turn up to the office, not work late, all those sort of things you've been describing. Well, that's okay if the firm you're working for's policies allow that and you're coherent with what you're being expected to do. However, people will judge you for it. People will absolutely make judgments about you that you want to influence. If you're looking to progress at all in the world, you need to be shaping those judgments and making sure that they're the way you want them to be. So I think for people who are thinking that they can just do whatever they like and it doesn't matter at all, I think they're wrong. I think the reality is they will be forming or creating judgments in the minds of others, peer group and above, who which may well shape the opportunities they get in the future and the way they're treated and the types of things they get to do.
It's about expectation, isn't it? Expectation management. People have to work hard. I mean, I certainly worked hard. I still work hard at
80 books, I would say so. Yeah, that's quite a lot.
And I'm currently looking for the next one, because once you get the writing bug, you've got the writing bug, and I've had it for years.
That's nearly you said nearly 50 years in work. Yeah. I mean, 80 books, you're rapidly approaching kind of not far off 2 a year. That's a hell of an output.
So at one stage, I was writing 8 books a year.
God, wow.
But then I wasn't married, and that might have something to do with it. But you can, and some of the books are not huge. I mean, they're not all the tomes that Winkle is, not the 500 pages that my Winkle biography is, or the 400 that my Mitchell biography will be. But I still managed to keep really on top of what's going on in the world as well, because I just couldn't not do that. I've always been interested in what's happening. I've always watched politics, particularly in the 2 or 3 countries I'm particularly interested in. States, France, and the Scandinavian bloc. And I really enjoy watching them. They're all different. They're all rather exciting. Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, and that takes us brilliantly into, thank you for the nice segue. It's a seasoned broadcaster showing up here into that whole geopolitical space. I mean, I think we live in really challenging times. I mean, no question about it. I look back on having been a youngster in the Cold War, at the back end of the Cold War out in Germany, to look back now and on what we thought then, the threats that we faced then, and look at where we're actually heading into, not least as a result of political turbulence and political challenge. Also, I think a kind of rather too relaxed position that our, certainly the UK population, but I think lots of other populations find themselves in as well, where they don't see threats in the same way that perhaps we did in the past. And they're not kind of focused on what might or might not be the risk. Everything feels a bit far away, and they've got quite comfortable with the lives they have. I mean, your perspectives on all of this?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I mean, I think we lack resilience here. And I don't mean we haven't got stockpiles of ammunition. I think we have a public which is not resilient.
I totally agree.
They don't understand what my parents went through. When the war comes, which I think it will, there will be no GPS. There will be no texting. There will be no mobile phones. The OPSEC will, depending on how long the war is, but it will be different. I mean, just look at what must be happening in Israel. They've been at war now since October 22, and they keep calling up the reservists. The reservists work in other parts of the industry of the country. I mean, they do industry. They're in commerce and whatever, all of that stuff. And yet, of course, Israel is so close to that threat. I'm impressed by Sweden and Finland. Everybody knows what they're doing. The Territorial Defence Force in Finland it's not really oversubscribed. It's just fully subscribed, men and women. And women don't have to volunteer, but they do. And they all get basic training. They can all ski from the age of 6. They can all shoot, because it's a very rural life in Finland, with the exception of 2 or 3 towns. They all know what they have to do. They're all incredibly proud of having been outnumbered 20-1 by the Red Army and won twice. They're resilient. People at home have everything they need to withstand 2 weeks with nothing happening. So they've got warmth and they've got firewood. I've still got a wood-burning stove. I am still going to have wood-burning stoves. I don't care what Secretary of State for the Environment says, because I have a gas boiler, I have an air source, I have electricity, for underfloor heating. I'm nicely spaced out based on and a very insulated house with triple glazing, based on my experience in Sweden, to seeing what the Swedes do. But we're in a country that doesn't even mandate double glazing, and it doesn't mandate insulation for builders. And why are we taking up farmland for solar panels? Stick them on the roof of your house. And if you think they're unsightly, get the solar panels that look like tiles. For goodness sake, guys, get resilient here. And there will be a day, perhaps, when oil, if the Iranians mine the Strait of Hormuz, 30% of the hydrocarbons coming through there will suddenly stop. Spike in the oil price and the gas price. Well, people are going to have to turn off stuff because they won't be able to afford it. So, get real with this world. It is challenging. It's the norms have gone. I mean, it's okay for the head of state of the largest and most powerful country in the world to lie. Ever since when has lying been, apart from maybe some spies have to lie, but when is lying to your population been at all permissible? So we live in a totally different time of populism. And populism is in Hungary, it's in, to a certain extent, in Britain, Northern Britain in particular, in the US, in Argentina, although in Argentina, populism has turned the economy around. But you look at all these countries, I look at them and I love having interaction with their representatives here in Britain to get some views. You get the government view, obviously. As you get to know them, you also get the personal views. And that is just as interesting. But, Dr. Fiona Hill, one of the architects of the Strategic Defense Review, very, very good on Russia, exceptional on Russia. A former advisor to the White House on Russia says the Russians are at war with us. We haven't realized that they are, because everything they're doing is in the grey zone. And you just have to look at it. The Finns, the Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians all know that. They get this all the time, all the pressure, and whether it's cyber or whatever, and we don't. And we are very complacent. And I'm afraid that's going to be really bad news for us if Russia continues. So Ukraine, which we haven't mentioned yet, and yet normally I'm talking about Ukraine every day. Ukraine is really important. And you get a president of the United States who sees it as transactional. Maybe I give you some more arms if you give me all your mineral rights or whatever. Or I just want peace. I want the Nobel Peace Prize. Come on. Get real. Get real. 54% of the American population voted for him.
I know, it's staggering, isn't it? I was reading an article in the Daily Telegraph this morning, actually, it's a commentary piece by one of their correspondents about Trump and Netanyahu potentially will deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for what they're doing in Iran. I'm going, really? That's quite a different perspective to the one that many would have, I think. But
I've been lucky enough to be in Iran. I like Iran a lot. I like Iranians. I like the architecture. I like the country. I love the food. The system stinks. I mean, any country that if you're a woman and you don't wear a headscarf, they take out one of your eyes. I mean, what sort of if Israel gets regime change in Iran, I shall be very happy, because I think it's a despotic, medieval, ultra-religious. I'm not a religious person. I see religion as the root of so many conflicts, whether it's Northern Ireland
totally
or
agree.
Bosnia or whatever. And I look at Iran, the Middle East, and you just go, no, and then you get our Attorney General who says it's probably illegal. Well, no, it's not, because Iran last year attacked Israel first. That's self-defense. Come on, guys. Let's get real. Is it disproportionate? Possibly. But then every night Iran sends ballistic missiles to Israel. Hey, you get into a conversation on this. I do think anti-Semitism has never died. It's always been here. If I read my history back to the day 1482 in Spain when the Jews were thrown out, Britain in 1495, there's always been something there. The pogroms in Eastern Europe and in Russia, the appalling attitude of the Nazi Party, but the Communist Party is the same in Soviet Union, on it. Do they do anything to help themselves? Possibly not. Should they do more? Possibly. But it's deeply worrying that we can be such a divided world, even on things like climate change. The climate's changing. Got to live with it. We can't go back. And net zero is, having actually done some work on net zero, so talking from a position of knowledge, is impossible. We've just got to learn to cope with it. And we should be doing that now.
I agree. And I think these things coalesce a lot, obviously, in terms of the impacts. I mean, I do think one of the things that's quite instructive from Ukraine and the kind of Middle East at the moment is the proportionality argument is one I talk about quite a lot in terms of particularly some of the acts that have been going on in both those conflicts, actually. One of the conversations I was in relatively recently with General Sir Richard Barrons was talking about, well, this is total war. This is what this is like. And people have forgotten that. He was part of the Strategic Defence Review team and was giving a presentation to a group I belonged to the other day and was talking about, if you want deterrence and you're going to need to pay probably between 3 and 5% or so of your GDP to get that, that's a real bargain when you compare to 35 to 55% of your GDP that you're going to be spending if you end up in a full-on war. And by the way, your country gets flattened. You deal with all the trauma and the personal dramas that go with that. And I just don't think we're in that space. We should be looking to a certain extent at what's happened in Ukraine, at what is happening in Gaza and Israel and Iran, and going, this is what this starts to look like for your populations if we're not careful. Because as you say, we're potentially sleepwalking into something here. I think we've got ourselves in a position where we are far too comfortable with immediate access to everything, certainty of power supply, certainty of phone communication, just-in-time deliveries. So, I order something on Amazon, it arrives tomorrow, if not today. And we get grumpy very quickly when it doesn't happen that way. If suddenly your Amazon delivery is a day late, people are getting frustrated by it. And that is back to the resilience point. I think, again, growing up in the 70s, born in the 60s, growing up in the 70s, really, where power cuts were completely the norm and you just dealt with all of that sort of stuff and you just got on with it. We're not in that space at all now as a country, and I think we're not alone.
Bob, I worry about our country being divided, not north-south, but and not rich-poor, but divided cities versus the countryside. And when you hear people who don't understand that milk comes from cows that come from the countryside because they eat grass, and they think it comes from supermarkets, or you have a government which says, no, we're not going to do anything about regenerating new power. We're going to import it from France and put our GDP up, whatever. I think the other thing, we're talking about GDP of defense. So our prime minister is off to a NATO summit where he's going to be the only country in NATO not to have pledged to go to 5%. And he wants to fudge where we are even to go to 3% by including things that have no relevance. I mean, I sort of roll my eyes at pensions and huge amount of the MOD budget. He says as a territorial who received no pension. I look at all of that and I think, come on, guys, Richard Barrons is so right. Spend 5%, be conventionally deterrent, be nuclear deterrent. The only thing that Putin understands is force and resistance. And we will be paying less for that than we will be if we have to go to war.
Yeah,
even the Cold War, we were paying a lot for our resistance. I don't know what the GDP figure is, but it must have been at least 10 or 12%.
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I mean, I think that the obviously the nuclear enterprise costs a lot in terms of the percentage of our GDP. And that's one of the reasons, obviously, it affects our conventional capability a lot.
Yeah,
But no, it's certainly going to be an interesting few years.
I'm a huge advocate of Britain and France working closer together because we have all the technical skills that are required. And okay, we fall out over fish.
And immigrants.
Yeah, immigrant. There's a whole bunch. I'm just trying to think of, of things we don't fall. Actually, counterterrorism, we're very close on counterterrorism. They have an Al-Shabaab threat. We know a bit about Al-Shabaab because of our training in Kenya and the operations in Somalia. So all of that stuff. But actually, what could we offer the French? Well, the thing we have with Trident is that it's an American missile body, but the warhead and all the other pieces that come out, the navigation, the countermeasures, and all of that, they are all things that come from the United Kingdom. Actually, we're better than that in France. So, we could work together. Is there the willingness? Well, with Macron at the moment, there seems to be. New president in 2027. We'll see.
What do you think is going to happen with the US in terms of actual support for NATO and so on? Do you think it's... I've heard, the reason I frame the question that way is I've heard of a number of senior Americans, very senior Americans in some instances, talk about take Trump seriously, but not literally. It seems to be the mantra. And I just wonder what your perspective will be on that.
The Americans are right. You do have to take Trump seriously. He is the most powerful man in the world. The problem we've got with Trump is that he believes that everything is transactional and is a commercial deal. He doesn't understand diplomacy. He doesn't understand how politics work. And he has a real issue with history. I mean, he told Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, that the Romans and the Americans have been allies for 2,000 years.
You're kidding. Is that right? I hadn't heard that.
Oh, it's just fabulous, isn't it? And the other bit was when the German Chancellor took the birth certificate of Trump's grandparents, showing that Trump's an immigrant. And he's got this thing about, so what did he say the other day? He said, why don't the English speak a European language? Because we speak English here and we're in America. So do I trust America at the moment? The whole of America? I don't know. I know some brilliant Americans. You would have met brilliant Americans.
Yeah,
I've
absolutely.
worked with brilliant Americans, so stunningly lovely people. But at the end of the day, if they're in the military or civil service or whatever, they have to be doing what their president says. And he's totally unpredictable. I do, he's got a standard thing, hasn't he? I'll put tariffs on 145. I'll pretend that you've come to me begging me to take them off, so I'll put them down to 50, and you think it's a good deal. Well, that's sort of how he's always worked. And I don't even want to get into his relationship with Putin, because I just think that is just too bizarre for words.
Yeah, it is. We could have a whole separate session on that. Just before we finish, Paul, I always just sort of loop it back to you personally. I mean, I always try and cover highs, lows, and memorable moments and things like that. What's the thing that stood out for you the most?
I think some things on television that I did with Sky, First Gulf War, Bosnia, places like that. The acceptance of my Winkle book, all good. Obviously, family-wise, delighted. Lovely wife, brilliant son, very lucky. Live in London and in the country. I mean, able to travel. Pretty good life. Lows. At the time, I thought not being a naval aviator was a low, and I didn't realize that it was actually going to open up the rest of my life to me. Not that many lows, really. Don't like being ill. That's a low. I had flu in February. I was contemplating writing my will. So no, Bob, I've been pretty lucky. I can't really complain about my life. And we'd all like perhaps more money. I don't need a lot more money. I don't want to be a millionaire. I don't have any of those sort of attitudes to life. I'm not striving for anything. I do need the next book to be in my mind. I've got a few ideas. I need to have one of those wonderful publishers' lunches, which go on for 3 hours. And you talk about everything in the last 10 minutes. He says, right, what are you going to do?
Yeah, nice.
So those are quite fun. And I have a really, really good publisher who's good on lunches. Yeah, pretty happy, actually.
That's a good thing. So, and the last question, which I always ask everybody, is what's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
Wow. Do you know, I really don't know. And when it comes to media stuff, I think it was certainly being asked to forecast what would happen in Bosnia, having been one of those who said that there will be a civil war in Yugoslavia and being poo-pooed and written against on that as a warmonger. I think being asked what the resolution was, and I think I said there is no resolution there. It will continue. It's a frozen conflict. And I think I've been right. But it's difficult to say at the time, and I got a lot of abuse for that. Yeah, that's probably it.
Okay. Hey, Paul, you've been really generous with your time, and it's been a fascinating conversation. I knew it would be. I mean, with a man as sort of broad-based as you are, with so many different things that you've done and so much you're doing, it's absolutely brilliant. So I'm extraordinarily grateful. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, a great pleasure, and have enjoyed, our conversations over the years. So this has just put some icing on that cake.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Take care.
Cheers for now.
I really hope you've enjoyed this fascinating interview with Paul Beaver. What an amazing career he's had. 80 books, quite unbelievable that he could be that prolific an author. And he's got some great stories and some amazing insights into a whole range of things. If you have enjoyed it, then please give me some feedback. Send me something to let me know what you'd like in the podcast in the future, who you'd like to hear on it, all those kind of things. I'm always really, really grateful. Please make sure you subscribe and do all those kind of things that, again, help to boost the podcast's audience. And as I said at the very beginning, if you're getting some value from this, then please think about supporting the show. And the support the show link will be in your podcast platform as the easiest way to be able to do that. It's been the 100th episode. I think it's been a great one to have as the 100th episode. Can't believe we're now in 3 figures, but looking forward to many more and see you again very soon. Thanks a lot. Bye now.